Hill here. There is no better way to share a story than around a campfire. And if you are in the Mobile Bay area, there is no better place to get firewood than our friends at Mobile Bay Firewood. This is a family-owned business, and I personally love using their easy-to-light, kiln-dried firewood in my fire pit. So use promo code MBFTSO for $15 off of your next order at mobilebayfirewood.com. Longtime friends of the podcast, the Growley Leather Company is a family-owned leather goods company in southern Alabama. All of their leather goods are designed and handcrafted to come alongside you in your daily life, share in your adventures, and reflect your character. Bryan and I both enjoy products from Growley Leather. So visit growleyleather.com and use promo code TSO2022 for a 15% discount at checkout. Find you a leather journal and fill it with stories from the storied outdoors. This is the Storied Outdoors, a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark, finding clarity in the stories we tell and the adventures that shape us. Welcome to the Storied Outdoors. My name is Brad Hill, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Brian Gill. Today, we are really honored to be joined by Tom Rosenbauer, who's the host of the Orvis Fly Fishing podcast, author of some of the best, if not most, of the instructional manuals for Orvis, two of which I have in my own library. I love this self-proclaimed geek with his desk is covered with books and fly tying material. He's invented some important things that I've taken very much advantage of, is the magnetic net retriever. Thankful for that thing. The tungsten beads for fly tying. He's generous to share what he knows with so many, literally, and I'm sure he would cringe to hear this, but a legend in the fly fishing community. And we're just thankful that you've taken time to just join us and chat with a couple of guys from Alabama about the sport that we love, man.
Well, it's my pleasure, guys. It's nice to be on the other side of the microphone, and I don't have to prepare, so I'm enjoying that.
Just answers some questions, huh?
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much. Anybody who knows anything about fly fishing recognizes your name, and you're widely known. But one of the things that I'm thankful for is how much knowledge and wisdom you share with the fly fishing community. If you're not a part of that community, it's a little bit daunting to get into. And
yeah, it sure is. Yeah.
You don't really, unless you have somebody to kind of teach you, it's hard to just kind of pick it up. But thank you for your all the things that you share. So is there was there someone who taught you to fly fish? Is there a mentor that you had? I mean, you mentor so many now. Is there someone who mentored you in the early days?
No, there wasn't, unfortunately. My dad took me fishing, but my dad was a bait fisherman, liked to fish for bullheads and white perch and bat and largemouth bass when he could find them. He wasn't that serious about it. Then he later picked up golf, and I lost my fishing partner, and I decided that fly fishing looked interesting. I had grown up as bait fisher and spin fisher. And, when I was, 10 or 11, I thought fly fishing looked interesting. I'd seen it in magazines and on the American Sportsman on TV. Back then, of course, there were no videos and no YouTube and no place to see that kind of stuff. And I got a couple books out of the library, which weren't terribly helpful. And I just hacked my way through it. I went down to Western Auto, bought a $20 fly rod and really struggled for many years, just casting and figuring this stuff out. Got a little bit out of books. I had a buddy in Boy Scouts who also thought fly fishing looked kind of interesting. And he started out, we kind of taught each other, so I've never lost sight of what it's like to be kind of thrown into this fly fishing world with not much knowledge and having to figure it out yourself and try to help people to shortcut that learning curve, because let's face it, we do it for fun, and it's a lot more fun when you're more confident and more comfortable with casting and knots and picking out flies and things like that.
Yeah. Is there, I kind of have a very similar story. My dad and I, we bass fished growing up, largemouth bass. I grew up in Eufaula, Alabama, and it's a very popular place to go bass fishing. And he would always say, why would I want to catch an 8-inch fish when I could catch a 8-pound bass? And I started looking at these Field and Stream magazines, and I'd see the guy in waders with a net and a big trout on the end of his line. I was like, golly, that looks really cool. I kind of want to try that.
Yeah.
So, I didn't start fly fishing until later in life. I mean, I guess in the last 7 or 8 years, but it was always something that was alluring to me. And I can still remember my first fish, and it was a chub on the Tuckasegee River. But I thought, man, I'm doing it. I'm in the river. I'm doing it. But is there a first fish that you remember? Is there a memorable first fly fish that you have?
Yeah, there was a pond behind my high school. Actually, I probably wasn't even in high school when I started. There was a pond that had mostly really small largemouths, little tiny skinny largemouths in it. They were like 6-8 inches long, and I would go down, and it was very clear water. I would go down to that pond and pretend they were trout, because we all aspire to catching trout. I don't know why. I've never figured out why everyone's so fascinated with trout, but we are.
Yeah.
I've become fixated with lots of other things like tarpon and carp and pike over the years. But and so I tied up. I started tying flies very early, before I even caught a fish on a fly. And I tied up some grasshopper flies and threw it out there and watched these little largemouths come up to it and inhale it. And I thought, man, this is pretty cool stuff. Yep. I just made this lure out of some feathers and fur and hair, and I can watch this fish come up and inspect it and then eat it. And that's pretty neat stuff.
That is so fulfilling to catch a fish on a fly that you've tied. I mean,
I still tie all my own flies. I mean, I could get all my flies for free because I work for Orvis. I can get flies, and I still tie every single fly in my box. And I still love fly tying. I still tie every day. I teach fly tying online, once a week, and I still love it. And there isn't a fly in my, I've got probably 30 fly boxes of various types, from salmon to tarpon, and every fly in there is one that I tied myself.
What's the over under, Tom, on the amount of tangles you've untangled in your lifetime of fly fishing?
Oh boy, it's got to be a dozen times every time I go fishing. So multiply that by hundreds of days per year, and probably close to 60 years of fly fishing. There's a lot of friggin' tangles in there.
Well, that certainly makes me feel much better, right?
It's part of the game, There's some days I think, why the hell do we do this stuff? Why am I doing this? I've spent all my time on tangling, especially when you're fishing droppers.
It's the most beautiful, frustrating thing you can do.
I think that's one of the similarities people have for why fly fishing is real close to golf in that respect. It's a fun, it's a good sport, but it can be so frustrating, over little bitty things make huge differences. Of all the fishing, obviously, I think you sort of answered this already, but why fly fishing as this career for you?
That's all I knew how to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I graduated from college with an undergraduate in forest biology from the State University of New York Forestry School. And I kind of tried to concentrate in fisheries and aquatic entomology, figuring I might be a fish biologist someday, but I didn't have any other skills. And there wasn't much I could do. So it's nice to work in your passion. 1976, I took a job as a clerk in the Orvis retail store in Manchester, Vermont. It was the only Orvis retail store at the time, and just kind of went from there and never left.
Man. So Orvis has taken you a lot of places.
Yeah.
What's your favorite?
I know that's got to be really, really difficult to narrow that down.
It's like naming your favorite child.
It is tough. It's a question I don't like to answer because I have so many favorites, and it's often the place I'm in right now. I mean, there's little tiny streams in Vermont.
You got one in your backyard? Did I read that?
Yeah, I got one in my backyard that I feel is my favorite when it's fishing well, and then I'll go to the Bahamas and sight fish for bonefish and think, oh my God, this is heaven. And then I'll, go to Montana or Wyoming or Idaho and say, Jesus, this is the best. So and I'll be fishing carp in a local river and think, man, there's nothing better than this. So it's really hard. It's really hard to pick a favorite.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, every place has its own pleasures and its own idiosyncrasies, and so there are lots of them.
There's something about fishing your local water and pulling out a good trophy or a bass or whatever, a trout bass, whatever, from your local waters. And there's a big push in Alabama right now. A lot of these guys are doing some really good work in Redeye Bass, and they kind of call that the Alabama brook trout, and they hit just like a brook trout. They live in beautiful places like brook trout do, and
it's a native species.
Yep.
Yeah,
so much fun to catch. A lot of fun to catch. Yeah,
they're feisty.
I mean, I had one of my most satisfying years in 2020 where I couldn't go anywhere. Wasn't supposed to leave the state, and God, I explored a lot of local waters for trout, bass, carp, pike. I was close to home, didn't have to get on an airplane. It was a really nice year.
That's been a sort of a topic of conversation here lately. It seems like now life is sort of getting back to like real time.
Yeah,
like things have opened back up and we're doing more, and it feels like, man, life is going really fast. When you're in 2020, like you said, I didn't go anywhere, and so it really made me focus on what's around my house, what's in my home. For me and my family and my kids, it was our backyard for a lot of the summer, which obviously we're in the midst of spring here. It was the best spring down here I can remember. As far as the weather is concerned, it was a gift because we spent so much time outside, because usually it gets really, really, unbearably hot, in Mobile and humid pretty quickly. And you don't want to spend a whole lot of time outside because it's fairly miserable. Yeah. But we had an incredible spring, and that year, as difficult as it was and as awful of the thing that caused it, the byproduct was a real appreciation for, our home right around our natural waters, what's within walking distance or a bike ride, not even a car ride, so that's pretty cool to hear that love for your home waters. And it's amazing how much there is to explore if you start to look, right?
There is, there's even, no matter where you live, there are places you can fly fish close to home. People in LA fish the LA River for carp, sunfish and bass, and it's you can find it. You can find some interesting stuff close to home.
Right. That's I wrote about, and we talked about, and I live in Mobile and I work down in Mobile, and there's what looks like a ditch right next to my office, and it's called Bolton Branch, but it looks like a ditch. There's concrete and there's junk in it, and it's a mess. And but there are fish in there, and so I'll walk over there. I keep my fly rod in my Jeep, and I'll walk over there with my little 4-weight and just tear up brim and bass in there. And it's right outside of my office. It's, their shelter or the bass structure is usually like a tire or
shopping cart.
Shopping cart. Yeah, right. But man, it's so awesome. And I know people are driving by going, what's that guy doing down there waving that fishing rod around?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's amazing what's there if you just stop for a second and look.
Yep.
And that's a lot of fun. I'm sure you spent a fair amount of. One thing that's interesting to me, fishing and fly fishing in particular, is tied to story. And I know when we exchanged our emails, you talked about like there's not like you don't feel very reflective or anything like that. But I'm sure there's stories to be told, and there's always the joke. As you're telling a fish story, the fish gets bigger and bigger as you tell stories. And so fishing is tied to story. And we love hearing stories. As a people, as a humanity, we love story. And particularly for Bryan and I, is sitting around the fire telling stories, right? That's where the stories are the best, I think, maybe is around the fire. So we sort of consider the podcast sort of a digital opportunity to sit around the fire with people that we really want to chat with and hear stories from. So Tom, if you're sitting around the fire, what's one of your favorite fishing stories to tell?
God, I'd have to think about that. Well, it's usually shared with someone who was in on the experience. It's remember when we were in such and such a place. God.
And the company makes it sweeter,
Yeah. Yeah. So you want me to tell a story, huh?
Yeah. Just a memorable fun. Maybe it was funny. Maybe it was, it could be anything. Just a good old classic fishing story.
Yeah. There's one story that keeps coming back to me. It was many years ago when the IFTD, the fly fishing trade show, was in Denver, and we would always fish. The group of us that worked at Orvis is a bunch of sickos like me that I work with, which is wonderful. And we flew out to Denver. We're going to fish. We landed in Denver. It was like 70 degrees and sunny, and we went up into the Front Range and stayed at a cabin that a friend of ours owned, and woke up the next morning and there was snow on the ground, like 4 or 5 inches of snow. Temperature had dropped 50 degrees. And the local guys, a couple of guides that were friends of ours, arrived at the cabin with their eyes as big as saucers saying, do you know what today is going to be like? Because when you get a day like this with snow and cold, all of a sudden the fish is absolutely crazy. Every fish will be feeding on top. So we walked into Cheeseman Canyon, which is, kind of a steep walk down into a canyon, and it snowed another 6 inches. And we weren't prepared for it. We had no cold weather clothing. And every fish in the river, they were right. Every fish in the river was rising. And this is typically a very difficult stretch of water. And the fish were stupid. Nobody was there. It's usually very crowded. Nobody was there because people couldn't get out of Denver with the snow. And we kept trying to hike out of the canyon, and we'd get up on a bluff and we'd look down and we'd see fish rising, and we'd climb back down. And 2 of the guys ended up with frostbite, which I think they're still suffering from. We had to build fires to stay warm. It was was miserable and it was wonderful at the same time. So
I love that.
Yeah, one more cast, just one more cast.
Yeah,
one
more cast. It took us hours. It took us hours to get. I mean, I don't think we got out of there till after dark, and we were just so freaking cold and wet.
Yeah, that's the fly fisherman's refrain, isn't it? One more cast.
Yeah,
one more cast. One more cast.
Tom, just to kind of tell you a little bit about our background and the way this podcast started. Brad and I were headed up to fish in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and on the way, Brad chose an audio book by John Gierach, and some of his essays that he wrote. And we listened to that, and on the way back, it inspired us so much to say, you know what, we've got some stories to tell too. What if we started telling these stories on a podcast and heard the untold stories of other people, other guests? And I know that you and John are friends, acquaintances, and it was so fascinating to hear his stories and the way he told them and the way he approached writing. And you're a prolific writer. Do you ever see yourself writing something similar, less instructional and more memoir-esque?
No. No, I don't, for a number of reasons. I think back and I think, well, my life hasn't been that interesting, really. I don't think I could fill a book. I have done a couple of coffee table books with essays in them. One was called Salt with photographer Andy Anderson, where I wrote essays. And then I just finished one that just got published, just hit the shelves this week, called Trout with Brian Rosenbauer, who's a brilliant fly fishing photographer. He does a lot of work for Orvis catalogs and things like that, and really enjoyed it. But it's not something that comes easily to me. And and honestly, books of essays, unless you're John Gierach, don't sell that well.
Yeah.
The writer has to be really good. There's a lot of people who have written memoirs about fly fishing that I think are pretty hokey, and I would never read them. I don't really want to. I mean, John tells a really good story, but most people, they want to tell about why they love fly fishing and how they get started, and I don't need to read that. It's boring.
He seems really funny, like the way he says things. It makes me chuckle many times. I've read through his essays before, and I'm like, dude, he seems like a funny dude.
He's a great storyteller, and you got to be really good to pull off the fly fishing essay game. Him, Tom McGuane, Jim Babb, Ted Leeson. Those guys are really, really good, but it's rare.
Yeah, You're right. You've been in the fly fishing world for a long time. I feel like just looking at it, and there's a lot of younger guys getting in it. There's a lot of popularity, kind of resurgence almost of fly fishing.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the fly fishing world is headed in the right direction, or do you think that there's some? How do you feel about the future of it?
I feel really good. When I first started fly fishing, it was the province of rich old white men, and it was snobby, and you thought you were special because you were a fly fisher, and it wasn't always comfortable. And now with young people getting into it, and people of different colors and women doing it, it's just so much more diverse and so much more interesting. the young people in fly fishing are the greatest because, man, they're just coming up with all kinds of cool new things to do. And I just think it's the best time to be in fly fishing right now. It's so much better than it was. And people complain, mainly old white guys complain about overcrowding. But, you know, we have vast resources in this country. The only place there's overcrowding is where people want to sit in a drift boat and float down a river that's just chock full of trout. Those are the places that are crowded. But, you know, you guys have discussed fishing close to home, and, you know, people don't like to walk these days. And there's so many places, and people that talk about overcrowding are just lazy. They're just lazy.
There's a lot of rivers around.
There's a lot of rivers. There's a lot of different species. Doesn't have to be, you know, fishing a popular trout stream, sitting in a drift boat. You can go to Yellowstone Park, which has fabulous fishing. And because there aren't many guides that guide there, and no drift boats are allowed, you know, it's hardly any anglers except right next to the road.
Yeah, there you go. If you do a little work, you can get pretty solitary.
You can, no matter where you are. Yep.
Yeah, I used to think, well, if you're fly fishing, you're just going after trout. And people say that to me all the time.
They do. They say it to me too.
They're like, you're fishing for trout in Alabama. I was like, well, there's a couple of places you can do that, but you don't have to just fish for trout. You can go after pretty much any species, you know, with a fly rod. And that's what makes it so fun. Is like, all right, how can I catch a certain species with a fly rod? And what's the approach, you know? And that's what makes it so much fun to me, is like, there's all kinds of fish that you can catch on a fly rod.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend from northern Vermont who fishes Lake Champlain a lot, and it's a large freshwater lake, and it's got everything in it, from landlocked salmon to tench and drum and bowfin. And I don't know how many species he's caught, but he goes after these. You know, you just sent me a picture this morning of a freshwater drum that he caught on a fly rod. They're really tough. They're like catching one of those, like catching a permit in salt water. And he just goes all over the place and catches these weird species. And he loves it.
We were, Bryan and I were fishing on this little river in Alabama called the Tallapoosa, and it flows in the northern part of Lake Martin, which is a big vacation spot in the central Alabama. And we had stopped at this hole where the river sort of drops down, and we were pulling across this hole, and I watched Brian's rod turn into a shepherd's hook, and I thought, man, we have tied up with a striper. And it just dove, and it didn't run around. And then finally it comes up, and Bryan pulls out this massive catfish that had come up.
Yeah.
It was like, of the things that I thought we would pull out of this river with a fly rod, that was certainly not one of them. That was awesome.
Yeah.
The guide had just finished saying, you never know what you're going to catch right here. And that, in a million years, I wouldn't have thought of catfish.
It was amazing. That's
Tom,
amazing.
Is there a, what's the white whale for you? What is the fish that you want to catch, or if you haven't caught it already?
I'd like to catch a sail. I've never caught a sailfish. I've had shots at sailfish. I've never caught one, and I would like to do that sometime.
What was there's a picture of you in the water with a massive tarpon that I saw. That's something that I've never experienced, never even seen a tarpon that big. What was that experience like when that thing took your fly?
Oh, it wasn't that big of a tarpon. I mean, I'm not that big of a guy. It was maybe 100 pounds, which for a tarpon is, kind of average.
Just 100 pounds.
Yeah. Well, no, there's lots
bigger than my
ones.
8-year-old.
Yeah. There's lots of bigger ones. Yeah. I was fishing with a couple of buddies in Tampa Bay, and that I fish with as often as I can. They're just a lot of fun. And we were fishing a place that a lot of tarpon were running through, and hooked it, and played it for quite a while, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And I always wanted a picture of myself in the water with a tarpon, because you're not supposed to lift them out of the water,
Right.
In Florida. And so the guide said, yeah, you could jump in here. It's, it's shallow enough. And so I jumped overboard, and he realized that I was a little shorter than he was, and I went totally under, and there I am treading water, holding onto a tarpon. Totally soaked.
Oh man,
there goes your tip, man.
No, he wasn't a guide. He was just a friend.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh man.
I've only caught one tarpon, and it was on a spinning reel, and they run when you hook them, man. They run for forever. I can't imagine that seeing that spool on a fly rod just running and running and running.
Yeah.
Man,
that's awesome. I love that. Yeah. You said something earlier about like the young people and coming up with all this cool stuff within fly fishing. What if there is one thing that you can put your finger on and say this has been one of the catalysts that has catapulted fly fishing more into sort of the public sphere? Is there one thing, or is it a myriad of things that have sort of catapulted fly fishing more into people's mind's eye?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. One is this Euro nymphing game, which started out as a competition technique, and I don't care for fishing competitions at all. I don't enter contests, and I don't count fish, but there are so many cool aspects of that, and I don't even like Euro nymphing that much, because the casting is kind of clunky, but it's deadly effective. And I have learned a lot of things, the design of flies and using a longer, lighter tippet. I've learned a lot of things that I've applied to my kind of standard nymph fishing that I've learned from these competition people. And I think a lot of us have. And, the whole saltwater game has been eye-opening. Lots of things happening in saltwater that we didn't think about before. It's just
I think one of the things, and maybe you can confirm this, but with a company as big as Yeti and the Yeti films that they do, like, a lot of people have seen those that wouldn't ordinarily be exposed to fly fishing. So that's been one of the things. And just the fly fishing film tour in general, has been something that I think has been a tool that has really opened people's eyes up to, wait, like you said, this is not an old rich white guy sport. Like, I can do this too.
Yeah.
It's like,
and
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the those films that you're talking about, Brad, that's kind of like the Field and Stream magazine to me. Kind of seeing myself in that stream. People are seeing these videos and putting themselves in there. Yeah.
And that I'm sure that's part of the reason that we have so many young people in fly fishing now, is because they've seen other young people in these videos having a lot of fun.
Yeah, it looks cool.
That looks cool. I want to do that. And so, and people see women see other women doing it. People of color see people of color doing it, and they say, I can do that too.
Yeah,
and it looks like fun.
Man, I mean, I have, you said you teach these classes on fly time. I mean, I've certainly this year, I have not gotten into it until this year, got some tools and sort of learning how to tie some of my, my favorite and most used patterns. That way I can make the things that I use the most and things that I like the most. But like YouTube has been like the teacher, right? I mean, I've watched
unbelievable.
And that's like Bryan said earlier. I'm so thankful for the way you share, because there's you guys have done tons of videos through Orvis. Like just recently, I was watching them because there was nothing I really wanted to watch. I was like, me and my son were watching like how to read water, and you were the video on how to read water. There's so many of those video instructionals that are so much more helpful than, say, the book that you started out with when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Like being able to watch YouTube and go, oh, that's how I did it. And then I can pause it. And like you said, we were talking earlier about the whip finish. I'm like, oh man, it's something that's challenged me, but thankfully I can hit pause and do that again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'll do it again. I need to see that again. But man, what a great tool. That's been, I think, probably another part of that growth of fly fishing is like, they're free teachers on YouTube. Well, you can learn how to do pretty much anything, I think, on YouTube. I think I learned how to replace the belt on my Jeep, on YouTube. I'm sure somebody's done a video on it, so I always look there at least.
Yeah. Somebody's done a video on how to do almost anything on YouTube.
Just about it. Yeah. It may not be helpful, but at least they tried.
Yeah.
Tom, one thing. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, we talked about you've been with Orvis for all these years. What has working for Orvis meant to you?
Oh, it's been everything. It's allowed me to go places that that a poor kid from Rochester, New York would never have been able to go to. It's allowed me to see the cutting edge of the equipment development and be involved in that. And it's just, all my best fishing buddies, most of my best fishing buddies are people that I work with. We hunt and fish together and travel together. And, it's been everything.
Awesome. Is there one thing about, Orvis as a company that you think this is what makes this company the reason I love working for it? Is there maybe there's an atmosphere or an ethos of Orvis as a company that you really love?
Yeah, it's a family. It's family owned, privately owned, family owned, and it is a true family. People are caring and thoughtful and respectful of other people, and we share a common passion. And so it's really obviously a good place to work. I've been there 45 years.
That's pretty rare.
Have only thought about leaving a dozen times, That's pretty good over 45 years.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
That's not bad. Tom, one thing that we like to ask our guests as the last question that we ask is, what's your next adventure?
I'm going to Belize on Sunday.
Oh man. Are you chasing after bonefish or permit? What are you trying to catch?
Well, I'm hosting a group. I had hosted a trip to Cuba a number of years ago, and it was a great group of guys. It's all guys, and we've since done a number of hosted trips together, and the group has kind of expanded with brothers and friends and sons, and it's mainly the place we're going to. It's called Tarpon Key, and it's mainly a permit and tarpon destination.
Wow!
And honestly, it has a lot of smaller tarpon, up to 60, 80 pounds, which are what they call baby tarpon, juveniles. Right. Permit. I don't obsess over permit like a lot of people do. They're very difficult to catch. Steve Huff calls them a dishonest fish because you can do everything right and they'll spin around the fly and swim away. So I'm going to concentrate on tarpon, but I'll throw to permit. I'm sure I'll try. But
now you mentioned sons go. Do you have sons? Will your son go with you?
No. My 17-year-old doesn't fish.
Okay.
They're very outdoorsy, very nature oriented, is outside all the time, but they don't care for fishing at all. So yeah.
He's finding his own way.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's good. Well, this has been, this has been a great conversation, Tom. I really appreciate you carving out some time to join us and to share. A lot of the guys that do listen to this podcast are Alabama fly fishermen, and we're just doing our part to sort of grow this community down here. And we thought it'd be great to hear from you, and you can be able to speak into, some of the things that you shared. I'm really grateful for those things that you shared. I know you said you shared those on other podcasts, but this has exposed you to guys that may not listen to those things, and part of our community as we try to grow and tell stories and to share adventures, man. So thank you for joining us.
It's so great. It's so great to hear that you have a community of fly fishers in Alabama. A place with literally no trout, or I guess you have a few places.
There's a couple of spots where they stock them, but they're not natural. They're not natural born.
Yeah. But it's great that people are discovering that you can use a fly rod in places where there aren't many trout, and that's really cool.
Pulling a popping bug and seeing a redeye bass explode on it is pretty fun.
It is.
If you're ever in Alabama, we could put you on some redeye bass.
Okay, I don't know if I've ever caught one, so I don't think I have. So
they're a lot of fun.
So much fun. Well, we've enjoyed this so much, and we hope hold on. For starters, I think we've been mispronouncing John's last name. So he's been such an inspiration to us. How do we say his name correctly? That's something I want to make sure I get right.
Girak, I believe.
Girak. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I feel like I want to make sure we're saying it right, because he certainly, his stories certainly inspired this podcast and these conversations. And this season, as we finish up the spring season that just is closing up, will be episode 50 for us. So we're really new to the game, but recording now, this will be for our fall season as we take a break over the summer. But these stories have been all over the place. We don't talk about just fly fishing. We talk about it a good bit because it's a passion of both Bryan and I. But we talk about all kinds of other things, but this has been a big part of our conversation because we love fly fishing. So thank you for joining us. And we hope this inspires some people to go, maybe I can fly fish,
I hope
videos.
So. I hope so.
And to see the sport grow and see all kinds of people take part in what we love about fly fishing and learn from it and enjoy it. And, they'll probably be untangling some knots just like me.
And you never outgrow that.
Well, that's good
to hear.
That's good to hear. But we hope these conversations just encourage people and challenge people, and really to not just go fishing, but to write their stories down, to share their adventures in the place that we love to call the Storied Outdoors.
Oh, that's great. I love hearing that.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. We hope these stories encourage you to write your own stories and share your own adventures in the Storied Outdoors.
Brad Hill here. There is no better way to share a story than around a campfire. And if you are in the Mobile Bay area, there is no better place to get firewood than our friends at Mobile Bay Firewood. This is a family-owned business, and I personally love using their easy-to-light, kiln-dried firewood in my fire pit. So use promo code MBFTSO for $15 off of your next order at mobilebayfirewood.com. Longtime friends of the podcast, the Growley Leather Company is a family-owned leather goods company in southern Alabama. All of their leather goods are designed and handcrafted to come alongside you in your daily life, share in your adventures, and reflect your character. Bryan and I both enjoy products from Growley Leather. So visit growleyleather.com and use promo code TSO2022 for a 15% discount at checkout. Find you a leather journal and fill it with stories from the Storied Outdoors.